Tonight we're going to look at, for a few minutes, troubleshooting Windows and applications. They have a lot of step 1, 2, 3, how to do the troubleshooting steps. Troubleshooting, to me, is something that becomes kind of an individual thing. You've got to use what works for you when you do troubleshooting. Hopefully, we'll give you the tools and the concepts, conceptually, how to do it. One of the reasons that you want to break all this stuff down into modules is to simplify the troubleshooting, what's not working. So the objectives: learn about Windows tools that help you when troubleshooting Windows and application problems. There are a number of tools that are built into Windows 7, Windows Vista, which, I don't know, one of you said you were going to commit suicide if you ever installed it or something like that. Learn about general strategies and steps you can take to troubleshoot and solve any computer problem. These are the ones that I'm going to click through relatively quickly. You can read them in the book. One of the things that I think you will need to know on the A+ exam are the troubleshooting, the CompTIA troubleshooting steps, which are, I think, on your web page. Because they'll give you questions like, Johnny just did this. What's the next step?
And that's on the middle page, a link to it? Or?
Should be. Maybe it's on the other middle page. I'll put it on this one. But it's the CompTIA, and you can find it on the internet. The CompTIA troubleshooting steps, and this has got them in there. You're shaking your head. You had those.
Like identify the problem.
Yeah, identify the problem and then test it, and then the last one's always document, which is the one that most of us don't do very well. Learn how to troubleshoot blue screen stop errors and improper shutdowns. Blue screen stop errors, one of the problems that I think you'll have is the way the Windows startup is configured, which is to something like restart on all errors or something like that. And to me, when I get a blue screen, and hopefully you won't get very many of them, the blue screen of death, about the time you find the error code, it restarts on you. You can configure Windows to not do that, so it stops on that screen, and you can actually see what it is. And typically on this one, you're going to get a download, a troubleshooting download, that if it's really important to you, that you can send to Microsoft, and they'll, for several $100s, maybe several $1,000s, tell you what's wrong with your system. Or you can just figure out the what did I just add, what did I change kind of deal. Improper shutdowns, when you do those, and I'm notorious, I'm impatient, so I do a lot of improper shutdowns. Windows will come back and say, hey, well, let's go through the check, and what it's usually going to do is a check disk. It's going to check the disk to see if it's okay. Or you can just say start Windows normally, if you know what happened there. Another improper shutdown, power failures, things like that are going to be improper shutdowns. And you can then configure the BIOS to either leave it shut down or to restart the system. But you'll see those things. Learn how to troubleshoot problems with applications. And the problem with applications, a lot of times, is going to be permissions, path, those sorts of things. Used to be in the good old bad old days is when you changed the letter on the CD drive letter, because you didn't really have enough disk space to put everything on disk, unlike today. So there, the table 12-2 in the book, and I didn't copy it up here. You have it. Quick reference for many of the troubleshooting tools offered in Windows. Who's got their book? Unless just for recording purposes. Yours says, because yours is the uncleaned up one. This is the reason yours is 5 is chapter 5 in the single book, and it's chapter 12 in the dual book. So 12-1. Man, these are big books, aren't they? And the reason that the table's not on the slide, it goes on for multiple pages. It's got things like the Action Center, the advanced boot options, which they're going to want you to do, advanced boot options, the F8 key when you start up, that you can go into safe mode, safe mode command prompt, safe mode with or without network support. The one to me is one of the handiest ones is last known good configuration. And if you remember, we said earlier that when Windows starts up, when it actually gets logged on and in a stable state, it saves that set of registry settings into an area known as the clone set in the registry. That's where the last known good configuration comes from, so that if you install something that doesn't work, and remember, shutting down is when you actually do most of the saving of these things. And the other things on the list, backup and restore, check disk, cipher, which is the command line command for file encryption, compatibility mode. Compatibility mode can be a big deal, particularly in the browser. I was working on a project today with a certificate server, a Windows certificate server, and Internet Explorer wouldn't get a certificate for me until I put it into compatibility mode. Compatibility mode would then allow me to progress and generate the certificate. The virtual machines, okay, there's a couple things on the virtual machines. Thank you. Compatibility mode. You can't start it, and you can't take it out of save state unless Internet Explorer is in compatibility mode. If it's running, you can manage it, no problem, but you can't start them unless you're in compatibility mode. Or if you have an issue, be sure you're in compatibility mode. Component services, computer management, we've looked at. Data sources, ODBC, I'll get there in a minute. This kind of comes in handy when you're using maybe Word and doing a bunch of letters from a database. This is just where your database are. Device driver rollback we've talked about. Device manager, disk cleanup, most of these things we've looked at, I think, already. Disk defragmenter, disk management, file signature verification, SIGVerif, SIGVERIF.exe. It searches for installed drivers that are unsigned, because you're only supposed to have signed drivers in these things now. Driver verifier, error checking, and the list goes on and on and on. System restore. System restore goes back to a point in time, you remember. Run as is a handy thing to have at the command line, and we've got those things that you can do run as in order to manage your servers or manage your workstations also. If you run as the administrator, then you can be an ordinary user and start something as the administrator. So a big table there for that. Strategies: should first approach the problem as an investigator. This is, be careful not to compound the problem through actions before discovering as much as you can about the problem. What's happening, what's not happening. This is where your customer service skills are going to come in handy. Because what's happening? Because you've seen mine with you guys. Customer service skills, what'd you do? You need to, when you're working on things, what did you do and what's the last thing you did and all that other good stuff. But what did the user do? And you've got to ask that skillfully so that you're not making them feel incompetent, inept. What was it doing? When did it start happening? Did you install anything? And they may have installed stuff and didn't even know it, but hopefully you will have, as a network administrator, installed policies that prevents your users from installing a bunch of stuff. It saves you an awful lot of problems if your users don't have the ability to do those things. Did you go to any websites? Did you start after you visited a website? Because websites can do things to you that you don't even know have been done to you. What kinds of things happened to it? Ask questions until you understand the source of the problem. And you may know what it is. It may be something that's happened before. We have a number of things around here that happens on a semi-regular basis for whatever reason. and you kind of have an idea. Systematic method used by most expert troubleshooters, introduced in this chapter, they say. Refer to the diagram on the next slide. So, again, what works for you? And I know this is in the book, but we start, question the user, back up data. And that's always going to be one of the first steps, is to back up data. Because when you start working on these things, there's no guarantee that after you fixed it, it's still going to work at all. That's never happened to you before in anything that you worked on, right? You know, you work on your car, it's not doing this something or whatever, and then after you get done, it won't start. Never happened to anybody? Same thing happens here, so back up the data. Be sure you do that. And then it says, examine the system or ask more questions. You may want to watch the startup. That may be, you may see something in the process that the user doesn't do. Best guess of the problem source. And these are the steps that we were talking about, Todd. The first one is interview the user, back up the data, establish a theory. What do you think's wrong with it? Because unless you have a theory, you really can't do a whole lot with it, can you? Then test your theory. Does your theory work? Test the theory. Is your guess confirmed? If it's yes, then we'll go to the next step. If it's no, I love this one. Give up?
Yeah.
Give up?
No. Yeah.
Give up. What happens when you give up? You can't give up. Actually, may give up. What's one of the things that, particularly in an enterprise environment, you're not going to do this in a home environment probably, but in an enterprise environment, just re-image the machine. And when you get into an enterprise environment, how much time are you going to spend troubleshooting a machine, and how much when are you going to re-image it? I'll pick on Matt since he came in and said, how much time do you guys spend troubleshooting a desktop?
Anything more than a couple hours.
Anything more than a couple hours, you just re-image it, right? That means that you've got to have educated your users so that they don't have any important data on the desktops. That's got to be stored on the servers. So we're going to test the theory, plan the fix, and resolve the problem. That's the one that we like, right? And then after we do that, verify and prevent. Verify is something that I see lots of people not doing. Oh yeah, I fixed it. Did you try it out? You install a policy. I install that policy. Did you try it out? You'd be surprised how many times it don't work. Try those things out. And then step 6 down here, you're going to document, which we all don't do very well. But this is the 6-step CompTIA troubleshooting process, which I think you will see. 13 rules introduced in the chapter that might be useful when troubleshooting. And these are the ones that, this is how we're going to make this lecture short. Approach the problem systematically. You can read all of the amplifying information. Interview the user, back up the data. Those are the ones that we already talked about, and the problems that have you. And these are the things we talked about. Any hardware changes, software changes, configuration changes. Anybody else use your computer? I mean, if somebody else used your computer, they may have done something that you didn't really like or didn't know about. Some valuable data in your system that is not backed up. For all you married guys, that would be all the pictures of the kids, right? If you want to have harmony. This one is important. Can you reproduce the problem? Problems that can't be reproduced are really difficult to troubleshoot. Ones that come and go are very, very difficult to troubleshoot. And that's where we get into, we talked about hardware. temperature and power can be some of those issues.
Is that where Event Viewer may help?
Is
that where Event Viewer may help?
Event Viewer may help. Event Viewer may help in any of these things. Remember, when we look at the logs, there's an application log. There's a system log. Take a look at those things. What's happening? Security log, probably not going to be that big a deal because did you get logged on? Did it maybe, but did it authenticate you? Establish your priorities. Decide what your first priority is. Ask for help when deciding the priorities. It says, when practical, beware of user error. That's one of the things that you may want to actually watch the user do something. We change that procedure, or they change this, or they change that. You've got to, if they're doing it wrong, you've got to be diplomatic about it. I want to go back to priority. Establish your priorities. One of the things to consider, and I think we've talked about this in hardware, is if you've got 4 or 5 different things that may fix it, and one of them's going to take 3 hours. Let's go to Matt's 2 hours. And one of them's going to take 5 minutes, and the 2-hour one's probably got an 85% of fixing it, and the 5-minute one's got a 5% probability of fixing it. Which one are you going to do first?
The harder one.
The 5-minute one. Because it may fix it. If it does, you just saved yourself the 2-hour one, the 2-hour process. And beware of user error. If you suspect it, ask the user to show you, and you may want to do that anyway. Show me. You're grinning. How many times has that happened to you?
I lost track.
Lost track.
90% of it's always user error.
90% user error, and this is somebody that's doing the job right now. Keep your cool and don't rush. A wrong move can be costly. Don't rush. Do one thing at a time. Because if you do 4 things at a time, which one fixed it? Back up important data. So the computer won't boot to the Windows desktop. Use a Windows Explorer to copy the files to a flash drive. There are a number of ways to get the data off. One of them is to just simply boot to the install media. When you boot to the install media, one of your options is going to be to go to recovery, I think, and you can get to a command prompt. You then should be able to copy the information. You could use one of the Linux boot disks to copy files. Lots of ways to get it off, so don't blow a partition away that's got data on it before you've actually tried to get it off. Remove the hard drive connected to USB port. You can do that. And these USB ports, you can get kits, and they're on the internet at about $14, $15 that will convert one of your 3.5-inch hard drives to a USB drive, conversion kits. They're really not very much. And you can get them for either IDE or serial ATA, whatever type it is. And you can get it for the full size and the reduced size for the IDE, the reduced size for the laptops.
Is that the same as an enclosure, or is that different?
Enclosure, you don't actually need an enclosure. These kits just actually have plugs. They have a power plug. They have an adapter plug that you plug into the IDE or the serial ATA. You plug it in. There are enclosures you can get to put the drives into if you want to make it a portable, but I did that with several of them, and I personally found the failure rate of the hard drives to be pretty high in those.
Probably overheating, maybe.
That's certainly a possibility because they are enclosures. Besides, you can get a 2 terabyte drive for about $69.
Yeah.
By the time you go to all this effort, and they're little bitty ones you can put in your pocket and carry them around. These are going to be big enclosures, so. But you can get these things to plug it in someplace else, or you can plug it into another one. Make no assumptions. That's the hardest thing because we all have opinions and think what we're going to do. Do your own investigative work after the user tells you about the problem. Try the simple things first. That's what we talked about, the 5-minute or the 2-hour. Do the 5-minute. Do the 5-minute one. form your best theory, and test it, reproduce the problem, and observe the results for yourself, and reproduce, if the problem is reproducible, that one is better. Become a researcher. Google is still your best friend. Yeah. Bing's actually getting pretty good too. Search the manufacturer website for help with a hardware software program. One of the things that I think you'll find out in the Windows world, that if it's happened to you in Windows, you probably ain't first. There's going to be something out there. There are a number of good sites. Petri has a great knowledge base. Test your theory. Video doesn't work. You suspect loose cables. Check the connection. Discover that it was loose. Connect it securely, and the problem is solved. So, what is going on? And you got to have a theory so you can try to fix something. If that doesn't work, one of the things about your theory, if you're doing something, have a way to undo what you did in case you make it worse. I think we talked about before that in these large organizations, if you're going to do something to a large number of machines, you do it all with a script. And before you do it, you have to write a script that will undo whatever you did. So you may need to do those. Divide, conquer, isolate the problem. And the isolate the problem goes back to what we want to do with these things is what we want to learn about these things is the modularization. What component of the machine or of the operating system is actually causing us the issue. Non-essential services. And again, my theory, non-essential services, turn it off, nothing bad happens, you're probably okay. But try turning those off, see what's happening. We'll see what's hanging it up. Look at the task manager. What's going on? What services are taking the resources? What are the long-term usage of these things? Start Windows in safe mode because you're going to eliminate most of the drivers there. Write things down. We always do that, right?
No.
I agree with the no.
I actually messed myself up this weekend not doing that.
By not doing that, you can't make yourself take notes, draw diagrams, make lists. And I'll tell on myself, I do this stuff at home, I'll do something to them, oh, this is going to make it better. And then 3 weeks later, my wife says, this doesn't work. What did you do? I didn't do anything. I haven't done anything today. And then, a couple hours later, it's, oh yeah, about 3 weeks ago I did this, and that's probably what's impacting it. The reason you need to take these notes is what you may be having an impact on might not be immediate. Don't assume the worst when working with a hard drive is not working. Don't assume that the data is lost. There are softwares, and they're generally not all that expensive, that if the hard drive will spin, it'll read the physical surface and you can recover the data. So a lot of the data is recoverable. If it doesn't spin, it depends on how much it's worth to you. There are companies that will recover it, but those are really expensive. The ones that the softwares that'll do this as long as it'll spin are somewhere in the $30 to $50 range, which is not, if you're going to recover, several hundred gigs worth of data or a terabyte worth of data, it's probably worth the $30. Reboot and start over, take a break, walk away. Anybody ever have to do that? You just get your eyes get crossed, go away, come back, and maybe get fresh start, fresh ideas when you do that. The least invasive solution first, return to a normal working condition. Know your starting point, find out what works and what doesn't work before you take anything apart. I don't know how you actually do that, I guess, from all of that searching that we're going to do. And generally, unless it's something that's really, really odd, you're probably going to find a solution on the Internet in today's world. Plan your fix and fix the problem, and after the problem is fixed, reboot the system. Verify that it's working. Check out things. Have the user log on and try out things, because sometimes it won't work. It will work for you and it won't work for them. Have them log on, because particularly if you log on as an administrative user, and remember that in Windows your user is probably going to be an administrative user running without administrative authority. You may be able to do things, run things that the regular user won't be able to do. And then document what happened. Help desk software, and we talked about SpiceWorks last week, I think. SpiceWorks has a help desk component.
I don't recall that.
SpiceWorks, you don't recall that. That's because you were playing football or something. But it does have a help desk component in it. It's free. It's something that you probably want to learn how to use. We'll give you lots and lots and lots of information. And here what we have is, speaking of the devil, SpiceWorks. It looks a little different. It looks a little different than this one. I think I've got it installed on this. I'll show you what one of the consoles looks like here in a minute. Troubleshoot blue screen errors when a process running in kernel mode, and remember we had the user mode and we went through all of the management modes, and we finally get to kernel mode. Kernel mode is the one that actually gets access to hardware. If we have something running in kernel mode and encounters a problem, we get a Windows stop error, also known as the blue screen of death. And if you really want to have some fun with people, if you're cruel, there is a screensaver out there that's a blue screen of death. Stop error at the top of each specific number in the error. The problem here again is that frequently the way Windows is configured, at about the time I find the error number, it reboots. You need to configure Windows so that if you get a stop error, it stops. It doesn't try to reboot. You may want it to reboot on the first error, and usually you can configure what to do on the first error, second error, third error. First error, you may want it to reboot. Second error, you want it to stop. So you can get the problem number. Bad pool header, and this is going to give you a lot of information. Typically it says, did you just install anything if you did take it out? But if Windows is running normally and all of a sudden these things start happening, it's probably going to be some sort of a major failure on the motherboard, or something got installed that Windows doesn't like very well. That's one of those bad applications that does nasty stuff to us. If the device causing the problem is listed in the Windows Explorer, locate the program file, all sorts of things. Check the event viewer. Always check the event viewer. This was kind of odd, don't you think? We're getting a blue screen of death. How the heck are you going to check the event viewer? Huh? Maybe safe mode. It may start in safe mode if it won't start in regular mode. If it'll start in safe mode and it won't start in regular mode, what's your first thought? Let's go back to the troubleshooting. What's going to be your theory? Hard drive? Maybe. That's what happened with yours, but yours really didn't get a blue screen. It just restarted. Huh? Something that said to start up. What does safe mode do for us? Loads all the basic. Minimum driver set is usually what you hear, right? You may have installed a piece of equipment that's got a bad driver. Like video or something like that. And it does a basic VGA video, so it doesn't do a lot of the drivers. And you can start up with or without networking. If you start up with networking, you still get the blue screen. And start up without networking and don't get the blue screen, maybe you got a bad network driver. A bad new NIC, something like that. Windows updates, and all these have to do with blue screen errors, and this is after startup. Update the stuff if you can get it started. But the problem with a blue screen error, the ones that I have experienced, is you don't ever get past them once they start happening until you go back and find out what the issue really was. Memory diagnostic tools, check disk R. Check disk R is something that really is very, very handy. And with Tyler's, that's what I was trying to, where I was trying to get to. His was a hard drive issue. I could get it started in the media, but then it wouldn't detect the hard drive, so you couldn't ever run the check. Actually, we did detect it. Ran check disk, it said that there are unrecoverable problems on it. So the check disk R can fix a lot of issues. I've seen it fix a lot of issues. I had a student one time come up, my machine won't start. We booted it, ran the check disk R, and it ran just fine. If you run into these situations, the next thing you probably want to do is back up your important data and get yourself a new hard drive. Memory diagnostics tool to check memory. These are all things that we can do from the startup media. When you do startup, you can go into recovery and check a number of things that are available there. These are common blue screen errors. These you can look at in the book or on the internet. 32-bit, 64-bit patches. I think that we beat the 32 and the 64-bit stuff up enough earlier. Keep in mind, 64-bit installation's got to have a 64-bit driver. 32-bit's got to have a 32-bit driver. When you're running servers and when you install things like printers, it automatically downloads the driver. When you install that printer on the server, it's going to, if it's a 64-bit server, it's going to install the 64-bit driver. If you have 32-bit installations running on some or all of your workstations, you're going to have to get the 32-bit driver and install it as an additional driver for that particular thing. Could be a 32 or 64-bit application. 32-bit applications will run in a 64-bit system, but a 64-bit won't run in a 32-bit. And we've talked about the differences between these two. 64-bit obviously is what we want. And they have the terms here. The x64, x86 refers to 32-bit CPUs, and all CPUs today are hybrid. The term x86-64 refers to these processors, and we talked about those in the earlier in the hardware portion. May refer to the 64-bit OS. Keep in mind, in the upgrade world, if you go from a 32-bit to a 64-bit operating system, you have to reinstall it. You cannot upgrade architecture. Error messages, IA64 is the Intel processor, x64 refers to the operating system. So x86, and the reason x86 is because those letters and numbers are in the Intel processor numbers. Memory diagnostics problems. It will check your memory. Memory diagnostics from the Windows Boot Manager screen. When we do these things, you can check it. We can look at a number of those things here in a minute. When we get to the media, repair your computer is where we want to go. Once we get there, we can do a number of things. System file check, scan now. I've had this fix things a couple of times. Protects the files and keeps the cache current. Can refresh a damaged file. This is going to be for the system files. Elevated command prompt. A lot of times people are going to run this SFC scan now, nothing happens. It's got to be at an elevated command prompt. Sometimes Windows will tell you that, sometimes Windows won't tell you that. Sometimes it just doesn't do anything. Keep in mind that for doing most troubleshooting, you're going to have to right-click on the CMD and run as administrator, or use the run as command. Hardware can cause these errors: memory, motherboard, CPU, video card, system overheating. Event viewer, check the event viewer, apply Windows patches. These are all kind of standard stuff. They all say do the same thing. I think that update Windows, check the memory, Check the BIOS, what's the temperature of this thing, and we're looking for nothing greater than 38 degrees Celsius. And most of the BIOSes now will tell you what the temperature is. What you've got to do is run the system, restart it, go into the BIOS. There are free as well as paid softwares that will show you what the temperatures are too. I think SpeedFan was that was one that he talked about in the first half in the hardware portion of it. Endless shutdowns and restarts, boot to safe mode, change the Windows settings, and this is where we're getting into the reboot, and you can look at these things when you boot into your Windows. Take a look at it. What do you want to do on an error? Reboot on an error, you may get into a continuous cycle. You may want it to stop so you can find out what those errors are. General steps. Try a reboot. I think that these are a lot of the same ones, but try a reboot. Reboots, you ever notice how many problems that a reboot starts? One of the things that you may want to try, instead of just a simple reboot, is shut the system down and restart it. Because when you do that, you actually clear all the memory and let Windows start over.
Don't you have to leave it off first?
You can, yeah, they use a few seconds. And the new ones have usually got an LED on the back that shows you that power's on the bus or power's not on the bus. You can actually turn the power off and wait till that bleeds down until the LED goes off if you want to be sure that everything's actually bled down. But you're going to have power on the bus most of the time on the new systems unless you actually turn it off with a switch or unplug the power switch. That's the way you can really get it bled down. I had an issue, wound up being a power supply that sometimes it would start and sometimes it wouldn't start. But in order to get it to start, what I had to do is turn the machine off, unplug it, let all of the power drain from the bus, and then plug it back in and the system would start. And it was a power supply because when I changed the power supply, it worked fine. Error messages and the Action Center, problem reports, XP error dialog box, look at Event Viewer. Look at the logs. See what the logs tell you. The Action Center can be helpful in finding a number of things, and I think we have looked at it. Error messages. How many times you get an error? How many of you actually read the error messages when they pop up? Do you really? From any of them.
I try to.
A lot of times it'll tell you exactly what's wrong.
A lot of times when you go to the Action Center, it says there are no problems. I'm
There,
like, well, why do you keep popping them up?
Yeah. The action. Well, some of what happens in Windows is, particularly when things are loading, they don't always load in the exact order that Windows wants. They'll get an error, and then it gets started and says, well, everything's fine, and that's what happens there.
There was one error I received that I could not make heads or tails of.
There's a lot of those that can't make heads or tails of. My favorite is the Windows unknown error.
Yeah. Well,
they know about the rest of them.
It was like a full screen of random numbers and letters.
Yeah.
Like in.
It depends on. You can probably go back. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was taking up the entire screen.
Yeah. You have some of those things. What that is probably a dump and not an actual error. That's probably a memory dump of where the problem is. That's why it looks so strange. Uninstall and reinstall an application. Windows has supposedly fixed the driver issue. Anybody ever install one application and another one doesn't work? That's that driver. DLL can be an issue. If the DLLs are the same name, which they can be,
I've seen it come
The one overwrites the other one, and it won't work on the other software.
A lot of times when you uninstall stuff, it'll say such
Do you want to delete everything? Yeah, you can, and sometimes when you may tell it delete everything, including the DLL, something else may not work. They may be sharing DLLs.
One of my favorite things is when you install 3 things and then go back and delete one of them, the other 2 stop working because all 3 of them have the same thing.
Yeah, they may have the DLL. Well, that depends on how much of it, whether you actually delete all of the supporting files. That's one of the things that makes Windows grows. Windows grows tremendously. And I guess there's no real way of stopping it. You can trim it down some, but be sure you got it on a big partition. Whatever Microsoft has, I would multiply it by about 3 or 4 or 5 if you're going to run it for very long. Outside interference, we got viruses, malware, all those other things, bad memory, corrupted hard drive. A number of these things, bad memory and corrupted hard drive, we should be able to test with the things that we have. Check disk, defrag, except for SSDs, may help you in some of these situations with the disks. Bad memory, the memory checker should help you out there. Here's one. Consider Windows might be the problem. Nah. Couldn't be, right? Update or restoring the Windows system files, download the updates. Use the system file checker, and I have had one guy, a friend that was having a wouldn't, said, go ahead and do this. He said, everybody's telling me all sorts of things to do. Well, it only takes a few minutes to run the system file checker. After you ran it fixed his problem. If you have, it'll check a lot of the operating system files, a lot of the system files, to be sure that they're really the ones that should be there. System restore, remember, takes you back to a point in time in the registry. An application hangs. That never happens, does it? Task Manager, if you can get it open, because one of the problems when the system hangs is it takes all the resources in the system and the Task Manager one of them, but you can't kill that application. I would go to the go to the application and kill that, or go to the processes and kill that process. I've actually had more luck for the going away quickly with the process than with the application. A lot of times the application will come back and say, you really want me to do this? Yes, yes, yes. Process ID. Use task kill. And task kill, this is for all of you who will have teenagers someday. I've told you my story, haven't I? My son used to he'd get on, this was during the days of AOL Instant Messenger. And you try to get him to go to bed, and he won't go to bed until he couldn't get on AOL Instant Messenger anymore. So the first thing I did is put him on a proxy server, which worked really good. And I turned off his proxy server at 11, I think it was. He was in high school. Problem was AOL Instant Messenger already had the session established. So it didn't go off. So I got smarter. I found this was XP. You had to go get a separate one. I went and found Task Kill, which was available. So at like 10:55 or at 11:02, after the proxy had said no, you can't get there anymore. Go kill the task. And you can do that in Task Manager.
And then you hear, Dad.
No, he knew what was happening. I didn't hear anything. But you can do that. This is something that Linux obviously has had for a long time. We can kill a specific process, but you can do that in Windows natively now. Installation, the default programs, and you can look at those. When you double click it, does it start with the right thing, or if it doesn't start with the right thing, you can associate specific programs with specific file types. The database connectivity tool to allow data files to be open, and this is something that you really do want to use. A service fails to start, corrupted or missing program, it could have a problem. Well, it could be, obviously, that was never going to be a Windows problem, right? Check the service console to be sure it's set to start automatically, and I have seen this happen multiple times in the server classes, to where you install the server and then you still go to do something else and it doesn't work, and people don't go to look to be sure the services are running. But check that services MMC to be sure that what's running and what's not running, and you can see what's running in Task Manager also when you do those things. And they should be set to automatic. We've talked about that. Manual, they're kind of on demand. Disable means it ain't going to start. Automatic means that it starts when Windows starts up. And there is an automatic delay, which is kind of handy. DLLs, we've talked about it a little bit. It's missing or a component's not registered. DLL is missing. You uninstalled something, and when you uninstalled it, you deleted all of the DLLs that were available to it. And they were using the same name, DLL, something like that. Component. When applications never work, update Windows. This is one when applications never work, you may want to uninstall it and reinstall it to be sure that you actually got the whole thing. Digital signatures. I did a little bit better than the tools. There actually are a lot of Windows tools, and I'm going to go back to the free set that everybody's downloaded now, right, from sysinternals. Sysinternals, lots and lots and lots of free tools available there. Questions? Blue screens are really a pain. If you haven't ever got to try to troubleshoot them.
I had a brand new computer blue screen once.
Yeah, it can happen at any time. Lots of things can cause a blue screen. One of the real tricks to the blue screen, to me, depending on how it's installed, is getting the error number. Because you got to be fast. Well, you got to configure Windows to stop there. In the configuration of Windows, you can tell it how to handle errors. And it's typically reboot. Okay, what I've done is open the Windows System Properties, the Startup and Recovery. When we go down here, it says, on the system failure, automatically restart. That means that if you have a system failure, you get a blue screen of death. As he says, you got to be quick. It's going to restart. What if we turn that off? Won't restart, just sit there. And then you can get the information. That's the default, is to automatically restart. And there's some other things in here, automatically restart. Write an event to the system log. That would be a good thing. But that means that you've got to be able to get to that log. Will it or won't it? Sometimes safe mode works, sometimes safe mode doesn't work on these things. Up here in this drop down, if this were a dual boot, we would have different options here. Since there's only one, it automatically starts there. And the time here, 30 seconds, is how long it takes you to make a decision if you have a dual boot, a multiple boot, which operating system you want to actually start. And down here, a kernel dump, and it's going to do those small kernel dump. This is the kernel dump on the system failure. If you really have an issue and you're a really big company and you have lots of these, you can send the kernel dumps off to Microsoft and they'll help you resolve the problem for a price. Questions? Okay, here is Spiceworks. It'll tell me a lot about what's going on the network. Where we are in this room, I can't actually get information about all the machines, but we have here DNS entries. We're deleted, 7 DNS entries changed on your network. 73 devices are potentially at risk when we do these things. You can look at what's going on the machine, the latest patches, what's available to them. When I look at this machine, it says we couldn't connect to this. That's what happens in this room is there's I can't get out of it. But we can look at the machines in this room. I don't know, let's see. Room 111. Okay, it says it still can't connect. I've obviously done something to myself, but the dashboard here, the event history, antivirus status when it goes through. I actually haven't had this thing running in a long time, but it will. I'm far from proficient at it, but it will allow you to look at specific things in the library PCs here. The ones that are there, what's going on, 7 updates to devices, the timeline, application, storage, and costs, 11 updates to devices. You just got to install it. You got to go find stuff and see if you can play with it for a little while. Still says that I can't connect to these devices. Those are virtual machines, all the library ones. But it is free. Okay, so I finally got onto a machine that is in this room that I can actually connect to. It's in the inventory, and you specify by network address which machines you want to inventory. And again, this room has got lots of internal firewall restrictions on it. But I can go to this thing. It says Timeline 8 hotfixes are installed on the desktop. 28 applications, on and on and on. The events, no events, general info, tell me about it in HP. The owner is admin. The MAC address, kind of handy to have sometimes. The product number, if we needed to go to HP to find out something about it. The groups that it's in, it says it's not been scanned in 30 days. That's because this thing hasn't been started, so I don't run it that often. The configuration of the machine, the local disk, the reserve 71% is free, the C drive 91% is free disk space, how much disk space is available on the machine. The one that I think is really handy is what applications are installed. So you can do this from the NOC, run this thing. Since you're the administrator, you can scan all this stuff, and you can go see if somebody's installing software on the machines that they shouldn't be. And not only that, when there's a configuration change, you'll get an email that gives you a configuration change summary. So you can look and see what users are doing. So I've got all of this, and it tells me what it is. I've got Microsoft Office Professional Plus here. That's a single license. Look at that. It even tells me what the license is. If you're going to try to use that, it probably won't work because that's licensed through a KMS server, and if you can't talk to the KMS server, it will not work so very well. Let's see, we do that. Network shares. These are the standard network shares, and if we go back, we talked about the $sign means it's a hidden shares for administrative purposes. So this has got the standard shares. You can look and see if users are sharing stuff that they shouldn't be able to do. Cloud services, we don't have any, and documents, it's not really got anything there, but it tells me I've got 8 gig of memory with no empty slots, it looks like. Back to the disk usage, those kinds of things. For a free piece of software, this stuff's pretty dynamic. I used it for the first time, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, wasn't nearly as good as it is now. It did a lot of the same things, but it's gotten an awful lot better. Get that, learn how to use that. That's one of the tools that you probably want to take with you as an administrator. Questions?